This computer. Here we go. All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to FractalU.com. I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, FractalU.com. And it is here Sunday, May 5, and we have an amazing conversation tonight about the Sufis and the geometry of attention and the Sufi dance and the last plea about the physics of soul. But first, we have some announcements, perhaps. I'm joined by Tufan Guven. Do you want to just say hello? And
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Tufan, geometricmaths.org. So the next 2 weeks, we are going to be having our lectures with different times because our presenters will join us from Bali. We are going to start next week's and the following week's Sunday classes at 5 p.m. New York time and 11 p.m. Paris time. So this is going to be different than our usual times. So just want to underline that. And next week, we are planning to talk with Juan from Bali, whose website is bioarc.co, who has amazing architectural designs. And he's also designing a temple, as far as I know, in Bali, and Dan can explain more about that. So we'll be happy to host him next week. And it's going to be an exciting call for sure.
so remember that is, in fact, 3 hours later for the next 2 weeks, because our guests are from Bali. Juan did all the actual measurements that we did for bioarchitects.net to kind of prove by measurement or many of the measurements, the physics that the biologic architecture creates implosive capacitance charged centripetally, measurable in the spectrum analysis of the weak electric field, that predicts whether the building is going to make a seed grow because it's centripetal electrically, and therefore a child grow, actually. And so Juan was really expert at that. He also, by the way, Erkried Harry, Juan Schlosser is something of an expert on the way that Victor Schauberger had piezoelectric water vortex and a water drip to make a spark and making an electric field. So we can quiz Juan Schlosser about his work with electrical implosion work in water with Schauberger that Juan Schlosser is also very knowledgeable about. So that's fun. That's cooking for the next 2 weeks. Oh, and one more little announcement we were going to do tonight is that, you know, that ELASA is creating a whole line of children's books based on planckfire.com and implosion work. Why do objects fall to the ground? And we have this week added to the language and text of this book, Why Do Objects Fall to the Ground for Kids? We showed this to our friends in Paris. It was amazing. And so we're actually improving that a line of books and adding text to the cooperatively to the lineage. The link is at planckfire.com also. And Elasa Tiernan is the author. So we'll have a line of kids' books teaching the science for kids, which does relate to the theme for tonight, which is, why are the kids losing their soul? Because scientists don't know how to electrical engineer what a soul is. And so governments can't prioritize, and governments end up creating a culture wherein which millions of children are losing their soul because we do not know electrically what a soul is. And I find that to be an emergency. And obviously that's a theme we've been reviewing for many weeks now here on FractalU.com. And so tonight's talk is going to be a kind of a climax review of that whole series of lectures, in which we also have a review of many of the images.
And before you start, then, also one small note that for our upcoming conference in South France in September, we only have 5 rooms left at the moment. And I guess you also wanted to announce something with Patrick. Did you?
Yes. So first, I'd like to say that we were just discussing before we went on live here that many of our guests here at FractalU are coming to South France in September, fractalfield.com/2024. And as Tufan mentions, there's only about 5 rooms left. It's amazing. The interest has been fabulous. And yeah, well, there's a new little project with Patrick related to this. I guess this is an announcement. So we are excited. We have a new invention, which is going to be a complement to piezofire.com involving crystal technology and implosion and directed longitudinal healing. And there's a whole series of developments in that regard, but I'm not allowed to do the details yet because it's cooking, but it's cooking beautifully. So there's going to be a new series of healing devices triggered by piezofire.com, which allow a very powerful directed longitudinal emission, which is so powerful even when you direct it into water and then use that water. It's incredible. So that is coming soon here at piezofire.com. Okay, back to tonight's lecture. So tonight, the lecture starts with a dedication to the Sufis. Tonight's lecture starts with my favorite Gurdjieff physics. Gurdjieff Sufi physics is my favorite kind of physics, actually. You know that I was taught by at claimont.org by Rashad Field, famously the Sufi master of the last barrier, and who taught in our friend Georg's Sufi community in Spain for many years, and also by Saul Bernardowski, founder of the Sufi Healing Order in the States from Virginia. And we had Sufi dance conferences at my farm for many years in Western New York. And the part of that story that relates to how tonight's lecture starts is when the Sufi master is instructing the student how to begin to prepare for the Sufi dervish turn. Now you remember that, remember the announcement for tonight's lecture was, why does attention track center of gravity? That's the intro concept that we wish to understand viscerally, as it were. So here's the point in terms of physics, that what planckfire.com has, in my view, actually proved by equation that charge collapse is the cause of gravity and charge collapse is the cause of consciousness. Well, which is to say, literally the cause of attention. So, and what we're saying very specifically is you take that cascade golden ratio harmonics tuned exactly to Planck at the throat of the vortex, that Planck length and time, that when the vortex climaxes by tuning to Planck, there is a drain hole at the Planck length and time at the tip of that vortex where the pine cones kiss noses, as it were. And specifically, what we are saying, a radical new physics, is the reason gravity exists and the reason consciousness and attention exists is because at that Planck threshold, there's a way out through the speed of light. In other words, simply that there's a way out for charge at the center of the vortex. Here's Einstein scratching his head, never figuring out why objects fall to the ground, because he knows that there has to be infinite charge collapse, and he knows that the charge has to go somewhere after it collapses. And that's what he couldn't figure out, and therefore he never could tell you why an object falls to the ground. So once you know where the charge goes at the climax of the vortex, which is to say, opening the spigot at the bottom of the vortex enables that vortex to get centripetal. Otherwise, no centripetal force. And centripetal force defines gravity and defines consciousness. That the more consciousness you have, literally, the more implosive squeeze there is in your aura. You can measure, I mean, electrically measure how conscious you are, literally, by how much your attention causes charge to compress. That's Bill Tiller. So why is this profound? Because remember, at the throat of that vortex, the nozzle of the pine cone, the Planck dimension, there is permission only there to embed and distribute into the longitudinal EMF array. Remember, longitudinal EMF array defines gravity waves, Tom Bearden, and longitudinal EMF array, as our slideshow again tonight will document, defines the collective unconscious, dreaming track, ancestor memory, clairvoyance, You want to see ancestors? You got to embed in that same longitudinal array. So that's why kids who are learning to see without their eyes, they do that implosion in their brainwave. Not only are they seeing without their eyes, then they get clairvoyant. Why? Because they're prehending, they're embedding in the longitudinal array. And that is the only physics of action at a distance and the only physics of actual telepathy, the nodes of that array, as Korotkov and Kozyrev proved. So, again, why is it profound that consciousness and gravity are caused by the same thing, namely a tornado that creates a drain hole through the speed of light at the center, the perfect pinhole, as it were? That means, and now I'm getting back to my Sufi teacher, that means if you track the center of gravity, and my Sufi teacher said specifically, there you are, you're a little embarrassed because you know that if you start the dervish turn as a Sufi and you should happen to get dizzy, then your Sufi master knows that you did not have pure intention. Oops, that could be embarrassing. So you want to prepare yourself kind of good for starting your Sufi dervish turn. So the Sufi master says, track your center of gravity from the center of your heart and follow it down like a vortex to the center of the earth. And then follow the center of that vortex with your attention from the center of the earth to the heart of the sun. Now, later in this conversation, we're going to show the electrical geometry, 7-spin, 5-spin plasma called Anu, the exact electrical plasma spin geometry of the heart of the sun, the heart muscle, layers of the human, and the exact geometry seen at the heart of hydrogen by clairvoyance called Anu. That is the perfect slip knot. If we understood that, we can understand why Helena Desnan is saying, well, the plasma heart of the moon can be steered by high-level intelligent plasma. And the plasma heart of Nibiru, these are, and now we think that Thoth is returning as king of the ant people because the plasma heart of the earth is waking up. What does the plasma heart look like? Oh, it's a plasma slipknot. What's that slipknot look like? We happen to know. Anywho, tracking the center of gravity with your attention helps you to inhabit the still point at the center of the vortex. I repeat, inhabit the still point at the center of the vortex. What does that mean? Now, this is where, if I'm good, I get out the slides. Here we go. I'm trying this now. Am I good? Okay, tours talk, moment, full sequence. Okay, are you seeing my slide now, guys? In order to understand,
Yes.
in order to understand the dance, one must be still. And in order to truly understand stillness, one must dance. Rumi. Now, remember think about Dannion Brinkley, he died, 2 or 3 times inside lightning bolts and came back a superconductor, wrote books about it. So how did he inhabit the center of that lightning bolt without getting dizzy? Well, keeping your attention at the center is where the principle of all spin inhabits. Now, there's a magazine article about this, Ancient Time Travel Technology, the astonishing wormhole dance of dervish sages, which is, here's a picture of the article here. Isn't this cool? So here's the Sufi spinning, and physicists have analyzed the dervish turn and discovered a Schwarzschild implosion geometry and a time wormhole and deep and profound lessons in physics from the Sufi dance. Remember, this is the same Sufi that said, if you can make the perfect echo, you are a saint. And what is the electric field that survives death? It's literally discovering how to make an echo, literally. And how do you find the sacred space electrically in a room? Well, you start by looking for the center of the echo, where recursive implosion is sustainable. So to find the center of the echo, I mean the Sufi dance, I mean the dervish turn, is a profound physics that the theory here is that the reason being able to inhabit the center of the spin with no distraction means that you're able to inhabit pure principle. You know that if you do not have pure intention, you cannot focus. You know, in other words, if someone has shifty eyes, it tells you this used car salesman is not to be trusted. It's good physics. So the ability to focus is literally proof of being a shareable wave. Ain't that cool? So the idea is that since the implosive drain hole for charge at the center of attention, the center of gravity, the center of the dervish turn, the center of the lightning called Kundalini, this is the center point, which creates a distribution into the array. An ability to inhabit that array means you can lucid dream and take memory through death. And that's going to bring us to part 2 of tonight's conversation, which is me saying, it is an emergency. We've got to teach our scientists the physics of what a soul is, or we will very, very soon have a soulless planet, because governments pass all the laws possible to prevent children from having a soul. Oh, children have to inhabit 5G and electrosmog and metal buildings and fractionated food. Everything that prevents children from having a soul will be the law until scientists can tell governments what a soul is. So until we know and can teach our science and our government what a soul is, we are condemned to millions of soulless children. I consider that an emergency, and that is part two of tonight's conversation. So notice that the soul is specifically, we have to say that we're going to say it, and then say it, and say that then we said it. The soul is created when the recursive squeezing of DNA during bliss, when the implosion of glands during bliss and coherent emotion, when the implosion of inhabiting sacred space, when that centripetal compression of electric fields, bliss in DNA, bliss in the glands, bliss in sacred space, that enacts recursive squeezing, braiding in the DNA, and then creates this perfect vortex, the side view of which is a caduceus. It's literally a golden spiral on the perfect cone. And then the transverse EMF up and down is converted into coherent longitudinal EMF out the center of that vortex. And that coherent longitudinal EMF array is the physics that we are going to prove tonight is what takes you into lucid dream and takes you through death, is coherence into that longitudinal array, literally the physics of soul. What Gurdjieff called, well, if you're not making a kesjahn body today, you're not going to get immortal. He called it the kesjahn body, what the Tibetans called the rainbow light body, and what the Egyptians called the ba from the ka. Are you making, this was, Gurdjieff was talking about you make this refined stuff. He said, you're making refined stuff, which builds the body of the soul. Well, I was there, and I was an electrical engineering student, and I sure as hell wanted to know what that stuff was. Gurdjieff called kesjahn body, which makes you immortal. I was damn curious when I was in the Gurdjieff school at claymont.org. And you know what? I now know exactly what it is. And we now know how to tell kids how to make the stuff that you can take through death and have a soul. And inhabiting metal buildings with electrosmog and fractionated food and all this crap is the opposite and could cost you your soul. It's real. So the next part of the slideshow is just a review of how centripetal forces in general are generated by the low pressure point in the center. And if the low pressure points enter an array, which is fractal, dodecaecosa, then the tornadoes get big. and they noted even here in the center of Hurricane Rita, that the center of that tornado, when you zoomed in, guess what? It was a pentacle. It was implosive. Look at the center of that tornado. So the low pressure point is created by centripetal forces that create implosion through center, giving the tornado a centripetal force and making it steerable. And the point being that the reason this was a lecture we gave at the time, which was, America, you got karma. Your tornadoes are out of control because magnetic lines were cut unwisely by construction, excess metal in human buildings, lack of rose fractality in land planning, lack of large-scale human bliss process, lack of collective lucid dreaming, need for labyrinths and stone circles, open lack of respect for elemental beings, ignorance of how to steer the solar wind compression. So America, hello, and planet Earth, you got tornadoes that ain't being steered because you don't know how, and that's dumb. That's what I'm saying. Actually,
your slides don't move. Sorry, we are still at the first one.
Oh dear, a moment. Tours talk. What are you seeing? Are you seeing boys and girls, or are you seeing?
Yes, this is boys and girls.
You're seeing boys and girls only.
Right.
Moment.
I'm seeing the yellow brick road.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Moment. Sorry, guys. Okay, so I'm going to change the screen share. Just a moment. Fixing the screen share screen. Implosion full sequence. Okay. So this is where I started. So this was, now are you seeing in order to understand?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So this is where we started, that in order to understand the dance must be still. And this was the magazine article about the astonishing wormhole. And this was the dervish turn. I'm sorry I got the slides screwed up there, guys. Oh dear.
Thank you, Ralph, for reminding that.
Yeah. See, it gives you two different options in screen share, and I didn't do it right. I'm sorry. So this is the idea that when that implosive squeezing happens in glands and DNA, it spits out the longitudinal coherence that we call a soul. Those are the slides we missed. So then the physics of tornadoes here we're talking about, that the still point at the center is the center of low pressure because of that pent symmetry, and the symmetry at the center is literally a pentagram, you see? So this was an indication of the principle behind tornado steering, the pent implosive charge symmetry. And this is what we were just discussing then, that magnetic lines are cut unwisely by construction, excess metal, not paying respect to the elemental forces. So all the things that prevent living plasma from communicating are the reason tornadoes are not being steered. This is the bad news. And so you've all seen this, that if you watched a shaman steering a tornado, you would actually see that bioplasmic streamers from the belly of the shaman embed in the tornado as the shaman begins steering that tornado. And the shaman says, I'm eating the hoocha. The shaman's literally feeling the pain of the tornado. And that then enables this embedding perfected slipknot operation in the plasma belly of the shaman, which looks like the Anu, which is the 7 spins, 5 spins we're just talking about. So that's the plasma geometry of human heart muscle, heart of hydrogen, heart of the sun. 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. That was the review. So we're now at slide number 139, and we're to go to 153. So it's 7 spins, 5 spins, 7 spins, 5 spins. 7 spins is the tetracube, 5 spins is the dodeca. And that Anu shape then became the symmetry of sun god, plasma intelligence at the heart of the sun, which, and remember, the sun god motif is behind the origin of all religions. Okay, so that's the section on the first slideshow here about understanding tornado steering. Now I'm going to stop that share. Okay, so setting the context here that attention happens when you get a center of gravity electrically. This means literally that if you took off your thick rubber sneakers and stood barefoot on the ground or something, stones or thin natural leather shoes and got grounded, at that moment, you should notice a sharpening of attention because the plasma vortex got a center of gravity. Do you see that? So that ability to make gravity and the ability to make attention both require the same thing, the centripetal force of perfect grounding. Literally a way out for charge through center, making it centripetal. Oh, I see Cat has it. Oops. Let me see here if I can see in the chat window. I see that. That seems like a good question there. Just one moment. Oh, yeah, here we go. So, to where would you even steer a tornado? Sometimes it's obvious and other times not at all. Oh, what a fun question. No, thank you for that fun question. Yeah. You know, remember, we always said that tornadoes will go out of their way to destroy metal buildings because they feel like pain to a tornado. And well, they should, because they prevent charge distribution. The reason why metal cities are literally soulless. So whereas a sacred stone circle or sacred stone temple will feel like the body of the tornado, and the tornado will not feel pain there. The tornado will never destroy a sacred structure. That's where the charge distribution enabled defines heaven. It defines part of your body. It defines what makes the tornado feel good. So obviously the tornado needs to steer to a place where its body can get distributed. The same way you want to steer a ghost, actually. Tornadoes and ghosts have a similar problem. If they lose centripetal inertia, they're toast. So in both cases, they're looking for a place where they can be more centripetal. The same place children are looking for a place to have bliss, a place where they can be more centripetal, which means beaches, nature, fresh air, healthy live food, and places where they cannot be centripetal, like metal buildings with poisoned air and hellish electrosmog. That's a place where you lose your soul and lose your centripetal force, and that is shit for the kids. I'm sorry to say that, it is. Until we know what a soul is, we're not going to have kids with souls. And so which beautifully brings me to the next part of the slideshow, is how do we prove that centripetal electrical forces are the physics of lucid dreaming and therefore ensoulment? So the next piece of the slideshow is literally about proving electrically the nature of what makes a soul related to the nature of what makes centripetal force. So I'm going to try this one more time. So here's the tourist talk. Okay, now this is where we're supposed to show this picture. So at the center of the implosion of bliss, sometimes called the Yellow Brick Road to Oz, there's a still point called the Emerald City where lucid dreaming is possible. And you can wake up inside the lucid dream, the Emerald City, and it's happy in there. But you have to get through the sleepy path into the lucid dream, the field of poppies. We went from the physics of Sufi dance to the physics of Wizard of Oz. So this is the background about vacuum energy, and we're going to talk about brainwave measurement and how Jean-Charles Moyen made that ability to bilocate, actually, to teleport. And so this is about Planck Fire, and the book Planck Fire. And at planckfire.com now, we have Elasa's new children's books. Okay, we were going down. So this Planck Fire implosion is a phase conjugate pump wave. And this is what the phase conjugate pump wave looks like. This same conjugation of phases. In blue is the equation, Planck times Golden ratio. And in green are the actual Schumann harmonics, literally the Hummer. And so we've talked about this many times. This is the equation from Planck Fire. And we're so delighted that Medrick extended the Planck Fire principle to Elphi.link, really showing that the Planck Fire, Planck times Golden ratio, applies to hundreds of self-organizing variables in physics. It's compelling now. Nobody can deny that planckfire.com is the way into self-organization, as it is into hydrogen. And optimized compression, this is our published article on how hydrogen was built, and that fractality is built on Golden ratio. Okay, so now this section, we're supposed to do slides up to number 28. So the only solution to compression is fractal. And note that the same cascade, Schumann cascade, the Hummer, which is the only way pyramids get power, pyramid wireless power, and the only way Life gets power. That literally, whether it's brain waves here or the way a seed germinates or the way you have bliss in your glands, humans and life, all life gets power specifically and only by imploding the Schumann harmonics. That is the nature of life. That's why the pyramids were called the Hummer. So then the evidence we wanted to present about lucid dreaming, it was here with Jean-Charles Moyen, when he had this beautiful golden ratio and octave cascade in the brain waves, which measurably preceded the moment when he would bilocate with witnesses, came back with sand between his toes. So what he did is massively embedded into the array with massive coherence from alpha to gamma. The alpha is in green. The blue lines are golden ratio harmonics. The pink line are octave harmonics. That is the stairway to heaven for this implosion. And this is how we teach kids to see without their eyes. And at the same time, same brainwave picture, they become clairvoyant. So they prehend the longitudinal array, and that is the physics of soul, as indicated by the fact that if you can lucid dream, you are going to take memory through death. Is that an indicator of soul? I say yes. So what happens is these harmonics squeeze the caduceus cascade and allow your brain to get the inner muscles to implode the liquid plasma vortex inside your head named attention so that the vortex comes to a point and starts squeezing well. And when that implosion gains inertia, it becomes implosive. Then you have the ability to have psychokinesis and to prehend the longitudinal array and to do all the fun stuff. So this is all the background about golden ratio and brain waves. Okay, so now that was slide number 3 to 28. Perfect. Now the next section is a review of how longitudinal waves work in general. So here we see Therify is known for triggering lucid dreaming. And here are the actual frequencies in the medical literature, university studies. Sorry, you can't see it very well. It's 28 and 40 hertz. So it's known what frequencies trigger lucid dreaming because they're implosive compression harmonics. That's the point. So that centripetal force, the Therify story is centripetal force made by those same harmonics. And that squeezes out at the center the longitudinal coherent stuff of the physics of soul. And that's the recurrent lesson here is if we could teach the physics of soul, then we wouldn't have to have a soulless planet. And I find that a compelling urgency. That's what's behind tonight's conversation. So here is an example of how attention is created by implosion. In a pinhole mirror, you have perfect collapse at the turning inside out point, the point of consumed perspective. And John Dee actually used this, the place where light scintillates, for example, for ancestral communication, because that was a phase conjugate point. Anyway, but that's kind of advanced. But here is just the animation you've all seen, that the transverse wave, the vibration is perpendicular to the direction of propagation, where the longitudinal or scalar or compressional wave, the wave of compression is parallel to the direction of propagation. Unfortunately, almost all of the electromagnetics we use on this planet for communication is transverse only, and that means not immortal, not telepathic, not ensouled, not longitudinally coherent, not embeddable, not implosive. Remember, only the longitudinal part of the array creating squeezing towards center can actually implode that center. See, if the transverse waves arrive from opposing directions, you are not going to squeeze that center well. It's not going to implode. It's not the perfect tomato juicer. So that brings us back to this issue that if you get the vortices set up like two opposing lasers making phase conjugation, that is the way you implode an array and you nest into that array. And that array is ancestor memory. It is the only Aboriginal name for God is that longitudinal array dreaming track. So if you don't embed in that array, And here is Tom Bearden confirming that that's how you make gravity waves. Hello. And this is the origin of most all bioactive fields. And this is the physics of all action at a distance, the coherence of the longitudinal array. So in this section, we're supposed to go to slide number 75. So this is noting that the pyramids were set up that way to make the golden ratio and therefore implode the Schumann cascade. So remember, this is also a review of the various lectures. Remember, this is my climax lecture for the whole FractalU series. We have other speakers coming up, but this is my last lecture in the FractalU series. So this is intended to be a reprise of the other lecture, one of which was pyramidwirelesspower.com. And we explained that because the pyramid takes that longitudinal cascade, the Hummer, and implodes it and then distributes that longitudinal coherence into the array, that is the physics of global wireless power. That is the physics of what's called a gravity diode and an atmosphere stabilizer. The pyramid is a gravity diode because by imploding the transverse and distributing it as longitudinal, it's a one-way gate for gravity waves. Hello. This is from the book 2/3 David Meyer and David Percy. So global wireless power, pyramidwirelesspower.com is based on this principle of a phase conjugate pump wave in the pyramid. And if you want to read that in French, it's okay. Here's 5 harmonics, golden ratio. And note the same harmonic cascade is precisely the physics of Kundalini. And in all of Patrick's work with us on that. This is a slide is credit to Patrick. So the same golden ratio times Planck is the Schumann harmonics, is the HRV harmonics, is the sacrocranial harmonics, is the breath harmonics, is the brainwave harmonics. They're all predicted by this same shape. You take Planck times golden ratio, and you get the harmonics of the sacrocranial. Notice the Mayer wave is at the center of attention here, 0.1 hertz, 0.0959. So these are the sacrocranial harmonics in green, the tidal frequencies. And here in red is the equation, Planck times golden ratio. And you see the spine liquid pump is doing this phase conjugate pump wave, and that's called Kundalini. It is bliss. And so this is that circuit then wraps around the brain, the homunculus, and implodes the liquid ventral cavities, and your ears ring and your ancestor phone calls begin. And this was the harmonics of the ear ringing, as we measured with Bentov. So recursive turning inside out is how it's done. It's how plasma becomes self-aware. So let's see, the last section here is on vortex. Let's, Tufan, could you check to see if there's any fun questions at this point? I'm going a bit fast here.
Yes, definitely. Ralph is asking, is the squeezing by consciousness or technical, or both options?
You say that it's the squeezing?
By consciousness or technical?
Is the squeezing by consciousness or technical?
Yeah, this is when you were explaining the longitudinal waves through the center, I believe.
Yeah, well, what I had in mind there was Bill Tiller's famous book, Conscious Acts of Creation, in which he measured repeatedly that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. Or in the famous story of if you had a mind meld with the Orion Queen Mog, it feels like a vice-like grip. These were very psychokinetic beings, and their attention was very, very centripetal. So consciousness is literally a matter of how much inertia is centripetal. You measure how much gravity you got. It's related to how much consciousness you got. Think about that for a minute. Does that mean black holes might be smart? I think so, actually. We certainly know that plasma can become self-aware. Nobody could argue that who's ever had telepathy with toroidal ball lightning. Oh yeah, plasma is capable of self-awareness. Well, how does plasma become self-aware? I mean, Holy Ghost or spirit of. Plasma becomes self-aware by recursively turning inside out and imploding at center. You know, most philosophers knew that self-awareness is born with ability to non-destructively self-re-enter. That was, in fact, the physics of Sefer Bereshith At first, in principle, the origin of thingness, the first word Bereshith of Genesis, was a sequence of turns to turn inside out on the surface of a donut. In the beginning, at first, in principle, the origin of thingness is the skill symmetrically to turn inside out and implode, plasma becoming self-aware. Go ahead. Was there another question there?
Yes. Brittany says, in USA, they have enormous microwave emitters that are used to steer weather across the entire nation. How is that interference interacting and affecting tornado energy? Anger?
That's a pretty complicated question. So that, first of all, cellular metabolism provably has a dramatic microwave component. One of the dominant frequencies of living cellular metabolism is the wavelength of adenosine triphosphate ATP, one of the body's cell's most important molecules. And if you measure that, it turns out to be about 1.91 angstroms, which turns out to be exactly golden ratio times Planck. It's very cool. So when my friend Bob Dratch measured Wendy Thacker's history of trauma in her spine by scanning for that frequency of microwave, then he turned that microwave scanning horn gun gold foil thread onto the horizon and proved that that same microwave scanner, which could replace all hospital scanners if the government hadn't stolen it from Bob Dratch, microwave scanning emission technology, that same microwave scanner was the ultimate dowsing tool, meaning that that critical biologic frequency of microwave is profoundly symbiotic to the Earth grid. Hint, physics of telepathy. So yeah, these microwave frequencies have everything to do with biology. You know, it don't mean that microwave is good or is evil. It's just part of the bloodstream of mind, and it becomes evil if it's misused or not distributable. But it doesn't mean microwave is inherently evil. No. In fact, that's the other thing Bob Dratch documented. It was very nice that if you take the pyramid wall carvings, I think it was Professor Phil Callahan worked on this in the infrared too, but the pyramid wall carvings, most of them turned out to be very optimized microwave amplifiers. and some of them are infrared amplifiers. And if you watch, you can actually see the insects navigating by the infrared and microwave coherence of pyramid rock wall carvings. Why are the insects navigating by the sacred rock carvings? Hello, because they're microwave and infrared coherence active. The same Phil Callahan we worked with, who proved that the physics of olfaction, smell, is mediated in the infrared, which is why hummingbirds were smashing into the window when the ladies were having bliss, even though the house was sealed, because they smelled it. The infrared went through the window. That's the flowering brain. It's the physics of smell. Anyway, so, microwave disorder can be profoundly disturbing to the biology of bliss. Absolutely. It is. That's why it was such a horrendous thing. We were traveling through Italy, and they never told you that they were putting all the microwave antenna in the church steeples and the schools, and you could feel the nausea as you drove into the town, man. It was hell. Again, we got to teach our physicists what soul is, or we're going to be as soulless as all those damn towns where there's microwave amplifiers hidden in all its church steeples. It is literally hell. You got to teach these physicists what soul is, or you're going to have a soulless planet. I'm telling you. Anyway, so yes, you could use, there is a microwave component in weather control, just as there is a microwave component in bliss control. Of course there is. It's broad spectral. In fact, the more broad spectral it is, the more self-aware it can potentially be. So thinking of any part of the spectrum as good or evil, well, it's electromagnetic, it's evil. Oh, it's microwave, it's evil. No. It's just, if that part of the spectrum is not distributable, that's evil. Evil, which is live spelled backwards, simply means failure to embed. Okay, next question.
Okay. Mara says on steering plasma, the energy we feel flowing through us when we feel the spin and flow, is this non-visible life force energy? when we feel it, is it imploding? My way of working the field is as a modulator and interface. I use my voice speaking light language and feeling and or simultaneously modulating plasma with my hands and fingers, writing, singing, holding, stretching the energy. It flows around me and through my body. Would you consider this steering the tornado or steering plasma? Is this equivalent to plasma life force energy modulation?
Well, that's a very beautiful testimonial. That's a beautiful language. It's a beautiful experience. I think that's a wonderful way of phrasing the question. In my own experience, I can say that over the years, the more I had access to the bliss process, Sufi dance, and then Kundalini, I noticed dramatically my ability to feel earth magnetic lines improved dramatically. So the more I had bliss, the more I could feel. Today, when I walk up to a field to douse the field, I don't have to, go across the whole field and walk over every magnetic line. I put my hand up and I say, where in this field is the magnetic cross point? And I go right there immediately. If it's a huge field, my inner voice, I can talk to magnetic lines beautifully. And that was not true when I was a kid. That evolved because the more I became implosive, the more my DNA was, I would say, literally a superconductor, just like Daniel Brinkley. So it's measurable. You zap DNA or a thread of gold with high amperage at the moment of crystallization, it becomes a measurable superconductor. So, Daniel Brinkley, everybody he touched after his lightning death experience, he had a flash of every key emotion of their life. He couldn't touch anybody because he would immediately get flashes of the key emotion of the whole life of that person. After a near-death experience, these things happen. So I think your testimonial toward your working with your bliss process and entering into deeper and deeper communication is a beautiful testimonial to a spiritual path and evolution. It's wonderful. It's just like, the beginning dowser has to use a hammer to move the water vein back into the well, where the advanced dowser will always just talk to that water vein. What's the difference? That's evolution. So I love your question, and I think you're in exactly the right direction. And yes, you are steering tornadoes. And the more you relax and have bliss and in bed and in tune with nature, you'll be steering bigger tornadoes very soon. I love it. Thank you.
So it's implosion that ignites the process, she adds.
Exactly. That implosion is specifically a name for human bliss process, that you don't become charged radiant bliss until you implode first. You get centripetal, then you get centrifugal, just like a rose opening.
Should we build more pyramids? Could we build pyramid farms like wind farms? What would it accomplish? Would it help balance the earth?
It's a very appropriate question. Well, remember, we think it was a galactic federation and antecedents of the galactic federation when the Earth was losing its atmosphere and its gravity coherence. They installed large numbers of these gravity diodes. Today we call them pyramids, not just for global wireless power, but to stabilize atmosphere and climate. So absolutely. And they were, almost all of them were precisely on the dodeca-ecosa Earth grid array for very good reason. These were the longitudinal nodes. So yes, we should be building pyramids, but we need to know what they do electrically. So not only do the ratio have to be right, but the scale has to be right. And then they use the mercury to add to the centripetal force. So pyramids aren't the only way to implode longitudinal nodes, but we must implode the longitudinal nodes or we lose centripetal force. And then Gaia is no longer negentropic unless we learn how. So yes, absolutely. That's introduction 101 to geobiology, for sure.
Oscar asks, can you expand on the beach as best place to lucid dream? Maybe connecting it to Jodie Foster's In Contact and the bilocation with sand between toes incident. Are beaches astral airports?
Are beaches astral air? Well, water is an astral air. So our friend Ava, she's she's a shaman and she's always predicting the future. And she always says the only thing she ever asks is she talks to the water all the time. And it's the water that's answering all her questions. Well, now we know the physics of why that hydrogen bond is so damn fractal, center of water and DNA ladder rungs. So it's perfect DNA radio, and you get enough water together that's happy and waving together. It's beautiful longitudinal interferometry. The negative ion wind at the beach is so full of mindfulness. It's cool. So almost all of Jean-Charles Moyen's early in his life teleportation experiences were at the beach. He's quite clear about that. And now we know why, because that's one simple place where you have access to lots of longitudinal coherence. So it's a pretty good place to start. Now, of course, after you get better at this, you know how to feel the magnetic lines, and you can feel the good magnetic line crosses, and then you can get leverage on the array from powerful magnetic line crosses, just the way Kozyrev had specified the minimum number of nanoteslas of flux density to measure Earth grid magnetic line crosses before you install your Kozyrev mirror for global military quality telepathy. So these magnetic nodes are very critical to propagating and inhabiting the array and must absolutely be studied if you would like to do tornado steering, cathedral building, labyrinth building, successful birth, successful death, telepathy, how to do a Cistercian cathedral. It's all about the leverage on the nodes of that array, yes. And that eventually, when you inhabit the nodes of the array, you find your cave where you're going to have the bliss to get immortal. It ain't going to be in a metal building. Nope.
Okay, Liz asks, could the vise-like grip actually be physically squeezing the ventricles affecting CSF by piezo? It feels that way.
Well, remember in the microwave, when Gurdjieff Benthoff more taught the physics of Kundalini, and we did this together actually, he measured with a capacitive accelerometer the phonon cascade coming up the spine liquid pump and climaxing into a lens rotating toroidally, implosively compressing the low frequency phonons onto the ventricle liquid horns. That he measured. This capacitive accelerometer was, I was a polygraph builder professionally at the time, and I'll tell you, I was impressed. Anywho, so it is absolutely phonon implosion, squeezing the longitudinal array onto the liquid ventricle horns, and the liquids in the ventricle horns become crystal, called getting horny, which is a conservation of the sexual liquids in part. And it is a compression effect. Is that compression effect phonon? Absolutely. Is that compression effect also an electric field? Absolutely. Does it have the air phonons? Does it have the liquid phonons? Does it have the electric? Does it have the magnetic? It has all of the above, and it's all implosive. And at the climax, I can tell you from 30 years of experience, it feels like lightning up your tailbone, squirting out the top of your head till it's like a red hot a red hot coal that you can't knock out of the top of your head. And your friends feel your top of your head gets a little point, as mine did. And your friends feel this negative ion wind from the top of your head. It's quite real. It is a little bit dramatic, but it also can drive you crazy if you ain't grounded, which is why Kundalini is both very fun and very dangerous unless you really get a handle on what's happening.
She says, I can flex it and it makes goosebumps.
Yeah, there you go. It makes goosebumps is the perfect metaphor, because the goosebumps, you ask a biologist why you get goosebumps. He said, well, your hair needed to stand up so you could scare away the bear. But there's more to it, actually. Your hair stands up because you're imploding capacitively. Literally, you have now become a shareable wave.
Can you squeeze the root chakra too?
Yeah, the mechanism of accelerating Kundalini up the tailbone, there are many yogic practices that have to do with squeezing the tailbone. It's called the bandhas, I believe, in various yogas. And it's true. You create this alternating compression effect. And if you have created juices from successful and non-pathologic metabolism, so this is actually, in the physics of Kundalini, it is a very specific gathering of the blue fire at the tailbone. And the blue fire is measured in the sense that the circulating motor of all cellular biophysics is quite literally ultraviolet coherence. The blue fire. The blue fire gathers at the tailbone. And what you do with it is life or death. It can be absolutely perverse or it can be absolutely bliss. And it's also absolutely dangerous. But it's absolutely necessary. And it's absolutely addictive. It's all of the above. So, and I don't think when Wilhelm Reich wrote his book, The Function of the Orgasm, I do not think he understood that ultraviolet blue fire even had the possibility of going up your tailbone. So actually, Wilhelm Reich's book, Function of the Orgasm, was clueless to the function of the orgasm, in my humble opinion. So the tailbone functions as a straw. And, we Scorpios get a little too juicy about these stories, but the tailbone needs to really suck. It really sucks. And what happens is the phonon component of the sacrocranial, they're called the tidal harmonics in the upledger literature. And quite clearly, if your spine liquid is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed. And that pump really sucks. And it sucks that blue fire current up your tailbone and creates an explosion of growth out the mouth of the amygdala at the base where the reptilian brain feeds the bird brain, Quetzalcoatl returning, so to speak. Anyway, I have told juicy stories about Kundalini for 30 years now, so maybe that sounds like a broken record. But so the idea is that squeezing at the tailbone has many implications for the proper use of sexual energy, especially in young people. So here you got young people, and for the first time, they have some available sexual energy. Now, the first way in which that sexual energy is released can have everything to do with whether they'll get access to bliss. If there's some coherent structure to enable discipline to the gathering and pressurizing of that sexual energy, then a certain part of it can be pumped up the tailbone, and that young person can have access to some serious bliss process. As I did, I was a virgin until way too late, I suppose. But on the other hand, if that young person is continuously and immediately releasing that sexual energy, the habit becomes that there's no pressure to go up the tailbone, and addictive behaviors and all kinds of things. So there's that, Gurdjieff wrote about sexual energy needs to be released sometimes, but if you have no ability to conserve sexual energy, you have very little access to bliss process. So the whole physics of hygiene for the conservation of creative energy has everything to do with access to bliss.
And at that point, can parasites use it, or do we need to protect it?
Yeah, well, the theory would be that if the creative energy is channeled up the tailbone, and then you create that very bright implosion called human bliss, then that flame, literally that flame, will toast the parasites. That's the theory. Well, essentially what it says is that the more dense the bliss process, the more it tests for which wave is shareable, which is to say can be distributed, which is to say pure intention. So the theory is that if you have regular access to a serious bliss process, it will toast not only the body parasites and the stomach parasites, but it will also toast the astral parasites. However, if the bliss is asymmetric and there's big holes in the aura and astral hygiene problems, well, then you attract parasites. The classic story is, you go into a bar and the alcohol addiction means everybody's got holes in their aura. You can measure it. And God, it's just a magnet for parasites.
Thank you. Is sitting under a copper pyramid good for you?
Most of the capacitance of pyramids is generated by the edges. And so you have the issue of the right ratio of the dimension of the edges. And then you have the issue of the right scale to accurately implode the Schumann cascade. So if both the ratio and the scale are accurate, and the material is a useful dielectric for imploding capacitor, and copper is a pretty useful dielectric, although gold could be even more fun. And then a thin film of gold in the face. There's lots of ways to use capacitance like a lens, and pyramid edges are one way to do it. So for example, you could probably create a replicable effect on seed germination with a copper pyramid. And if you knew how to tune it, you knew how to align it, you could probably increase that effect. And many of the sacred stone structures were used largely for seed germination triggering for that reason. So I suggest measuring the actual weak electric field of that pyramid and tuning it, and then choosing more and more improved dielectric materials. So there's a whole series of physics there, some of which we discuss at pyramidwirelesspower.com. And for a time, you could increase the centripetal force, for example, of a meditation, and eventually you'd probably outgrow that, but it's not a bad way to start. And in fact, the real pyramid was used when I lied down in the king's chamber in Cheops. The lights went out and I had a bliss experience, actually. And that pyramid was used to stabilize the body so that you could plasma project out of the body without the body decaying, for example. There's many uses to a pyramid.
Thank you. Another one. Has anyone tested the Beamer pulse electromagnetic device for its coherence and effects on the biofield, heart-brain coherence, implosion, etc.?
I believe the Beamer, that name refers to many different things, I think, but the Beamer in general did refer to a phase conjugator. And I think there probably were some tests, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to comment in detail on that question. I know, for example, the Therify uses golden ratio conjugation accurately tuned and definitely helps create lucid dreaming and plasma projection. The whole concept of raising the Jed was a name for plasma projection, the Jedi.
Okay, this question is coming from me. In terms of sacred geometry and toroidal dynamics, can you expand on how consciousness is self-reentry?
Well, subjectively, it's kind of pretty to say non-destructive self-reentry defines consciousness, but how do you practice that practically in your meditations? Well, what that means, when they said you breathe into yourself and you keep returning your attention to the center, it isn't that you're attending to nothing. Not true. Actually, you're attending to where the attention is focused more and more precisely until it becomes pinhole refined and actually becomes a lightning bolt. So actually, the climax form of attention is the lightning bolt named Kundalini. That is a climax form of attention. And I can tell you that that's a beautiful and powerful thing. And, maybe it's why I talk so damn fast, but it can be overdone. There is such a thing as too much. Absolutely. Because it can toast you. So you do not want to inhabit the lightning bolt past the point at which the lightning bolt tells you you're cooked now. Just like Daniel Brinkley didn't want to stay in that lightning bolt too long, or he'd have been really dead. So, there is a limit to this phenomena that, we used to take shaman groups through shamanic journeys into the heart of the sun until I realized that many of them were coming back dizzy. What does that mean? Every ancient shaman tells you the heart of the sun is cool and inviting, and it's an eyeball, but don't go into that eyeball until you're ready, which is similar to saying, don't don't die until you're ready. I mean, don't have bliss until you're ready. It's the same physics. To prepare yourself to inhabit lightning bolts, you need to get accustomed to thinking only in terms of pure principle, because that's the only thing that inhabits the array. Okay. So as long as you're distilling every experience you have into pure principle, then you're ready for death. I mean, bliss anytime. However, if when you go to bed at night and you play your day backwards, you get distracted by things that you haven't processed, that's a clue that you ain't quite ready yet.
What can be a good technique to heal holes in your aura or to make the aura more symmetrical?
That's the right question. I had this interview with Gumadi, my former partner, Pam, who was teaching Ashaya meditation techniques in Germany. It's how we landed in Germany, actually. And she said, yeah, most of the people who come to our meditation school did too much drugs. He said, and she said, they all got holes in their aura. And how do you fix that? I said, well, she says, you know, it ain't overnight. A long-term lifestyle, discipline, yoga, meditation practices. Because the fact is, holes in the aura are precisely asymmetry in attention. That's what they are. And how is your attention restored to symmetry? Ooh, that's the heavy question. So returning attention to symmetry means that all aspects of your life become balanced and you can see pure principle at the center of everything. And once you begin to recognize pure principle in everyone and everything you see that which is immortal about everything. And that perspective from the center of all, if you have that real perspective, then your aura begins to heal and get more centripetal. So basically it means, you know, dealing with every unshareable memory. In my case, in the, I don't know, first months, many months after my really intense Kundalini experiences, I spent weeping. I mean, weeping for days, hours at a time. I even had no idea why I was crying. Particularly, I was driving into the work and there's a row of trees on both sides of the road. And there's me driving and the sun's coming up this gorgeous country. And I'm crying the whole way. I didn't know why I was crying, actually, but was it bliss? Yes. Was it processing old pain? Yes. Was I, you know, was it real crying? Yes. Was I sorting my memory? Yes. Was it easy? No. But was it necessary? Yes.
Yeah, but also one of the key things to well, get rid of your holes in the aura would be to release trauma and entanglement and all that, and then send the parasites away, send them to jail or wherever, and then you clear up. And when you raise your energy level, you're not well, not reachable anymore. So that's also one of the aspects, very practically.
Yes, which means that you're not attracted by all of the old temptations anymore. And you know, multidimensional cellular healing, Ken Page, they would talk to all the old parasites with finger twitches, and they would send the parasites away by loving them to death. But yeah, and there's a whole hygiene to that, to dealing with parasites, astral hygiene, exorcism. You know, much of the physics of schizophrenia is actually recognizing multiple plasma domains in one aura, and to know when those plasma domains come and go and to talk to them and to really feel and see that presence. That's advanced shamanism 101. And I know that Professor Ralph there has many of those skills, and he's going to speak about them at our conference too, aren't you, Ralph? Thanks for asking the right question. You're right.
Yeah, looking forward to the conference. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Anything else there, Tufan? How are we doing?
We have covered all questions, and I guess we have a happily ever after.
So there was a climax section for the visuals, which was about the geometry of fire, actually, 91 to 110. Let's just see if we have time for, so share screen. This is the Tours Talk X, and we were now going to 91 to 110. This is just a reprise of all the old slides. So visualizing the array, the reason the array works is because the longitudinal nodes cross and compress and exchange inertia with transverse only at the symmetry compression nodes of that array, whether it's Earth grid, ancestral memory, or the platonic nest of charge collapse causing gravity, and even the way atomic table is formed. So the array works like the ping pong balls, where if all the balls touch each other, when you bounce one at one end, the other one bounces off a billion balls away. And so there's a very sensitive array because they're all locked into place, literally touching each other by the phase lock. So the array is literally quivering sensitively. And so touching that array, touching one point, is to touch every point. So this becomes the platonic solid nature of the atomic table. The electron shells are a platonic nest, and the nuclear geometry hadrons are the same platonic nest, because that makes golden ratio. And then that introduced the idea that stargates are formed by the same physics, that if centers of mass, for example, trapezium and Orion, are literally a cube, the biggest stargate in our galaxy, and that's implosive. So we're supposed to go to 110 here. So that becomes a light cone, and that literally is the star map of Orion and the history of imploding stargates, and that where your attention can travel in the array is determined by your nodal position with respect to the array. And this double light cone was called Yod-He Vav-He Yahweh, which is the Japanese woodcut of the origin of Orion. It was also called the Antarian conversion. Note the double opposing light cones. This was really the origin of the Orion Wars, was that stargate. So that's all in the physics of the vortex, that the fingers of the harmonics that brought that vortex to a point. And this is the slide that Harry is working on. He's going to make that vortex work, aren't you, Harry? It's fabulous. And so this is actually, the gravity happens when that cone, a 60-degree light cone would be optimal, actually translates the transverse to longitudinal, and it spits out the longitudinal out the bottom directionally, which is why that vortex made gravity. And if the amount of electrical and magnetic and mass inertia focused in the vortex increases, the amount of gravity you make increases. So making gravity electrically is a matter of getting the vortex to the right angle to spit out the longitudinal EMF directionally, efficiently. And we have all equations for that at fractalfield.com/propulsion. So notice that if this is just a classic example, what they call the EM drive, it's just a trapezoid in which they bounce microwaves. If they knew why objects fall to the ground, they could then tune that so the microwave cascade would be tuned to Planck by golden ratio and increase the amount of gravity made, because the implosion in the microwave is tunable. And in the long run, that's how these fire crystals work. And this is related to our new invention, that if you trigger these crystals correctly with the frequency signature of the perfect pump wave called piezofire.com and planckfire.com, and this is how the famous Koski frost crystal made 800 times its own weight in gravity. And we covered this in the Pyramid Wireless Power lectures. And so actually, I would say that Tony Rodriguez and I are making a whole new series of videos on this, which will be professionally edited, and we will be coming out with a whole new series on better understanding fire crystals and gravity making and all that stuff. But notice here, what's so cool is that when Grebennikov walked to the top of a hill made with insect skeletons, and then he floated, we now know the physics, that the capacitors in the center, if you look on the right here, it looks like a double vortex in the geometry of the insect skeletons called cavity structure effect, implosive capacitance making gravity. Okay, we're supposed to stop at number 110 here. So you've all seen the vortex work we're doing with the imploder.com and the jitterbug, which is implosive charge, and how that's a mechanism of superconductivity. And that warp propulsion, what they call warp, it's not bending space-time, that's crap. It's implosive acceleration of charge into the longitudinal vortex array. That's actually what warp propulsion is and what Koski frost is about, and what fire crystals are about. And so the last part of this slideshow, we go to number 136. Remember, the context here, we want to make the point about teaching scientists what it is to have a soul. If we could teach scientists how to build soul in children, then our planet does not have to be soulless. Until then, we're condemned to be soulless. And I don't like it. That's why I get enthused. So another way to instruct those scientists to build a soul in children would be to teach them the physics of the principle of the infinity walk. Deborah Lawrence, Deborah Sunbeck, my friend. So when a child is taught to walk a figure 8 and then do the cross crawl with their hands and then favorite music and then they feel the top of their corpus callosum get hot, and then dyslexia will measurably disappear. This is called infinity walk. And the physics of why dyslexia disappears is because dyslexia, as you know, is increased innervation wires between the two halves of the brain. The corpus callosum has more wires measurably in the dyslexic. So they're measurably more creative. Dyslexics are measurably more creative. However, there is less sorting. So how do you engage the sorting principle? Oh, you teach them to turn inside out. I mean, walk the figure 8. I mean, to recursively do the figure 8 move. And that actually creates implosive attention. Now we're supposed to do slide number. So this in the early literature, we measured golden ratio when kids were learning to see without their eyes. This is Korotkov's first discovery of golden ratio in brainwaves, actually. And then when they measure where the golden ratio in brainwaves is dominant, guess where? Top center. Hello. And even the earliest device, Mind Mirror by Cade, the picture of alpha beta brainwaves creating bliss in brainwaves, the early mind mirror, this is like 40 years ago. Although they didn't know it, they were making a picture of golden ratio between brainwave harmonics. And finally, let's see, we're going to end with 142 here. Yeah. Finally, if you look at the physics of Agnihotra, why is it, here is a living plasma in an implosive capacitor lit precisely at sunrise, sunset, precisely to embed the local plasma into the longitudinal array, and you feel this electric moment. Your hair stands up just at sunrise, sunset when they light the Agnihotra, and that farm was incredibly fertile, okay? The physics of Agnihotra is very instructive into the physics of longitudinal interferometry. And it's so cool, I notice around here all the time, that just at that sunrise sunset moment, you have this fabulous explosion of bird sounds. The birds go nuts. Sunrise. Why? It's because they know the physics of the longitudinal array, even though your local radio engineer has not got a clue. The birds know. Okay, so in retrospect, have we made a point about once we teach our physicists, our scientists, what electrically makes a soul, kids have access to sacred space, living diet, compression, magnetic lines, escape from electrosmog, escape from metal buildings, live food, a genetic diverse, open pollinated DNA, all the things that serve implosive compression in the aura make a soul. You can measure that by, if the aura gets coherent, measurable GDV and Korotkov's technology. So you can measure when the aura gets big. Yet everything in life is about growing that aura, because the size of that aura is the ba from the ka. It's an indicator of compression is possible. It's telling you if your child is going to begin to lucid dream and then take memory through death. Now, I ask you, is there anything more important than teaching children how to have a soul? Is there anything more important than that? I can't think of it. The Aboriginals were absolutely right. If you have the skill to teach your kids how to have a bliss experience, that is the definition of the existence of culture. So in the West, I'm telling you, by the biophysical law, if you can't teach your kids how to have a bliss experience, you do not have culture, and you are not making a soul in your kids. So learn how to teach your kids how to have a bliss process, or you not only do you not have a culture, but you're losing the soul of your kids. Hello, that's my excitement for the evening. I just feel strongly about this because I realize how rapidly this planet is losing the soul of the kids. You know, the kids are being taught, oh, you're going to need a faster computer program, and you're going to need AI, and the bigger the computer you are, oh, you're involved. That is bullshit. It's not about how fast your computer is or how much AI you got. That's absolute crap. There ain't no metal computer that's ever going to have a soul. And if we can't teach our kids that soon, they're going down the drain, and it's a bad drain. So anyway, this is my little ambassadorial project for the evening. Have we made a point usefully about the science of soul? What do you think?
I think so. Thank you.
Thank you. And so now, next week we will have Juan Schlosser from Bali. Remember, it's 3 hours later. And I want to thank you again for joining FractalU.com and putting up with my carryings on. But my intention is good. I want to help the kids. Let's do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and see you next week at 5 p.m. New York time.
See you next week, everybody. Blessings.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dr.
See
Ralph.
you. Bye-bye.
Blessings. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.